Welcome to another edition of the ALN Thursday at 3 p.m. web discussion program. And we're very excited to be introducing Michael Homan, AEL. I spelled his name wrong and it's my name too, so apologize for that. Associate Director, Mobility Solutions Team with Guidehouse. But before we get started in our discussion, I want to thank our organizational members that include Onuma Inc., our patron members, Jacobs, ABS Quality Evaluations, Definitive Logic, and CGI, and our special organizational members, especially Guidehouse, which is a member, and Moshe Nelson will be assisting me in facilitating this program. So first, let's bring on Michael Homan and say thanks. It's nice to have you. It's had a nice little introductory chat, but we like to start with a question of how did you get where you're at in your asset management journey? So we'll let you get started with that one.
Sure. I've been at Guidehouse for almost 2 years and working on the asset side of deploying EVs and EVSEs across public and private fleets. And what drew me to that, I did a couple of decades at a large utility in the middle of the country. And on the finance side, I was a controller. I was a business units, large capital projects, where we were testing how are we going to deploy capital, whether that capital is effective over time, defending it in rate cases, et cetera. And the most fun I had was inside the fleet management group. I was the director of fleet for almost 5 years. And the decisions about how to choose vehicles, choose across all asset classes, how do we expect them to be used? How are they going to depreciate over time? What are they going to be worth in the market when they come back or when they're ready to return? That all came into a total cost of ownership and a net present value calc that really let us know whether we were running an effective fleet. And so it's been, as a finance guy, kind of a wonderful way to prove that you're making a good decision over time.
Excellent. So you made an interesting choice to be with Guidehouse, and you were saying why that is. So I think that's worth sharing. It's really interesting.
Yeah, thank you. I found in the fleet job that it's like all assets. It's complex when you really try and get 5,000 of them to be available every morning and get out there and do work, and folks are counting on you in storm and restoration work. And the value chain involved in that might be 9 or 10 players deep in order to get all of that working. And as we began to electrify the fleet and make really any continuous improvement changes, the opportunity to get all of those 10 pieces of the value chain kind of rowing in the same direction, you can go to each member and they do what they do great, and they will go up or down one step and try and lean in a little bit and help you. But I would still end up at a place where there were 5 or 6 people around the table in order to get anything done. And the job description here at Guidehouse is to be the glue that kind of holds all those 10 pieces together. And so from the technical piece through change management, to the asset management, for us to be there kind of gluing the folks together and keeping all of the rows aligned, those oars aligned rather. It's really rewarding, and I was glad I found it.
I love that description of your job and what attracted you to Guidehouse. So Moshe Nelson is an ALN board member and a ALN senior fellow, has been a strong contributor. And I understand, Moshe, what was the project that you worked on with Mike, and what is it that you want to ask him about related to that project?
Well, first off, thank you, Mike Bordenaro, for allowing us to be on the ALN Th webinar. It's always a really exciting opportunity, and I know affects a lot of change across the United States and globally, given the entire ALN membership. So thank you. Mike and I had a great opportunity to work on essentially a fleet assessment together. And my history with fleet across the federal government, GSA, and across DHS, state and other agencies. So being able to be paired with Mike here and really gain a lot of those industry best practices that he was bringing in into a federal client's environment was very unique. And I learned a lot along the way, and I think we delivered a pretty effective strategy for this organization to, modernize or make other relevant decisions. So that was our missing collaboration point. If that makes sense.
Okay, so building off of that, you were working on federal, but Mike, you brought up an interesting point about working with private and public. Everybody's got to electrify their fleet to some extent. What do you see as the difference between what a private organization and a public organization has to do? Or is there much difference?
I think that the fundamental difference, and you can see I started out in the Navy way back in the day, that there are some missions in the public sector that are just non-negotiable. That the total cost of ownership, the NPV, is not going to be where the decision ends. It is an important piece. I mean, it's good for government. It's, am I making a smart decision? Am I looking around the corner? It's an important part, but it generally doesn't have the weight that it does in the private sector. In the private sector, it is all about, we've got to get the total cost of ownership. Not the ups and downs between fuel and maintenance versus original purchase price. Those are going to play out over time, but I need to move into this with an understanding that I am making the business better from a total cost of ownership perspective. And so that's really heavily weighted on the private side. It either needs to make sense, or we need incentives to make it make sense, or we need to understand when it is going to make sense. But there's got to be a glide path that the business is better at the end of this journey. Whereas on the public side, it's, no, the mission is the mission. If this was, if we could make money on this, it wouldn't be a government function. So it's right. They could end up in a place that the TCO is higher than what you would see in a private application, but it's FEMA, they're gonna go. So it's it's that
right. It's that disaster preparedness.
Yeah.
I learned at a government microgrid, U.S. Army microgrid conference in 2009, difference between effective and efficient. So,
yes.
At that point, yes, it's efficient, but if we're trying to get away from the enemy and the battery runs out, that's not very effective. So, there is clarity in the difference there. But engineering wise, there's probably a lot of similarities, the problems that they're facing. What are some of those similar problems?
It is in terms of, the electron is the electron, the grid is the grid. We're all hooked to the same one. It is interesting on the public side that some of that electric infrastructure that is, almost always inside the utility in the private sphere is owned by the government. As facilities were built out over time and they were remote and something had to be built, and it ends up kind of being agency or department owned legacy infrastructure. That is a difference when it comes time to electrify, because when you're electrifying and the utilities are going to be a participant, you share the cost, because the utility is going to put that infrastructure in the rate base. They're going to pass some of it to you. You're going to have a change in rate, and there's a math there on the private side. On the public side, in these larger installations where this is, agency owned or department owned equipment, there's no one immediately available to cost share the new transformers and switchgear and controlling equipment that you need. And it can feel like you're awfully alone with a big bill in front of you. And so that's the main difference I think we see.
Well, I think that's where asset management, an asset management culture is really helpful, because if the government is saying electrification is important for the future of the country, then bearing some of that burden aligns with the mission, and therefore it can be approached, attacked, absorbed. Is that the correct assessment?
It is, because of the way that the rollout goes, so there's Executive Order 14008 that is directing each piece of the federal executive branch to buy 100% of their light duty leases or purchases by 27 need to be a zero emission vehicle. And by 2035, all of their vehicle purchases need to be a zero emission vehicle of some sort. And on the vehicle side, it's about availability. Like, you were already paying for the car. Most government vehicles are going through the GSA lease program. So you were on kind of a monthly payment plan for those vehicles anyway. So there was a budget for vehicles. There's incremental cost up front. Then you're going to save on fuel, and the intention is that you're going to save on maintenance as well. But when you get ready to plug that in and you get to the EVSE, well, the EVSE is, it's not capital on the government. It's all cap.
You've got to say EV, electric vehicle,
Electric
SE. What's the
vehicle
SE part?
supply equipment.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you.
That's okay. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, it's the chargers back toward the utility. All that equipment that it takes to get the power to your CCS or your NACS connector there. It seems to be more and more NACS here in the United States, given the latest news. So vehicles have a budget. They're converting. It's a little bit of a premium up front, sometimes a lot of a premium, but the fuel is on the back end, and it really is going to be cheaper. I mean, it just is. So there's savings over the long run, and the government has a long run point of view. So that's fine. The EVSE side, though, in the private world, it would be capital. Government doesn't really have capital, but it's got cash, and it's only got so much of it. And so it is pressured on the programs that already exist to take money out of those programs and fund the EVSE that's required to get power to those vehicles, because that's an either or. There's no extra cash. It's been defined, it's been awarded. It's really pretty rigorous on what you can use it for. It's not a casual, well, just move it from this bucket over here. That no one has the right to do that. And so finding the money to build the infrastructure is turning out to be the critical path for the exercise.
Mike, one thing that piqued my interest that you mentioned was just regarding, the difference between leased vehicles and the investment around the electrification infrastructure, and then agency-owned vehicles. Can you talk a little bit more about the difference between the two, and then for agency-owned vehicles, the considerations that would be made?
Sure. So in general, there's about 650,000 government-owned vehicles out there. 450,000 of them are in the GSA lease program, and the GSA lease program they're managing total cost of ownership for you. So you sign up for the lease. It's 5 years for smallish vehicles. It's 10 years for biggish vehicles. You pay a lease, and you pay a per mile rate that is going to cover your maintenance, and then you've got some kind of fuel card to get your gas. In that world, GSA is watching that vehicle, watching its residual value, pulling into the system and letting you know when to turn it in, and you've got a pretty consistent cash flow for the services that are provided that you control by having a vehicle or not. On the agency owned, those are vehicles typically that are larger. typically that are going to last longer, and they're typically more expensive. And they were typically providing an important function. There's lots of emergency equipment that would fit in that, bucket trucks. Law enforcement, the things that you need to customize heavily and you might use heavily and you want to be in complete control of when it's available to you. Those 200,000 vehicles, they tend to be older just because they were robust and they could last longer anyway. But they're sitting out there as large electric load because they're big. I mean, when the new internationals and Freightliners that are coming with 210 kilowatt hour batteries, they're just experimental and more than experimental, sorry, hitting the market now. That's a lot of power. And when you try and get 180 kilowatts over in 16 hours, you divide that and you need a pretty robust level 2, and you might need a level 3 to get that going. And that is the difference, that as you're building out the EVSE, the kilowatt of the charger is an interesting place to start. I want 100 kilowatts. I've got 8 hours to do it. I need a 12 kilowatt hour. That's about 96. Okay, well, that 12 kilowatt hour level 2 requires 80 amps. A small level 2 at 7 kilowatts would be 40 amps. And there are not that many extra amps laying around facilities. And you start adding up your required amperage separate from the kilowatts. The kilowatts it's an interesting, you pick the kilowatts based on how much battery you need to fill, but that size of the unit then drives the infrastructure inside the facility. And so even large facilities, they're just never overbuilt because the utilities won't overbuild because the public service commissions won't let them make money on assets that aren't used, right? So there's a regulatory perspective that keeps the utility building just what the customer needs after the customer needs it, not forecasting forward. And the customer doesn't want to pay for extra capacity because all that equipment is super expensive. So even in a big industrial service drop where you might have 480 volts and 3-phase and it's running a small factory, feels like it's a lot. That's 1,000 amps. And 1,000 amps is just what it needed. So there might be 20% left. The electrical code would put 20%. So there's only 200 free amps, even at a big industrial site. And one level 3 charger is 156 of those. And so you just run out of capacity faster than folks believe they're gonna. And it is a surprise as we move from, well, I'm just putting chargers where I can and we'll see if they get used mentality to, this is my work truck and I need it, no kidding, at 7:30 and it's got to go tonight. And that means I need this. Well, it's a whole new level of urgency.
Yeah. Let me ask you another thing that you keyed in on. This is just so great. The change, the innovations that are occurring in the electric vehicle market. I want to juxtapose that with the time that it takes for the federal government to procure, well, A, anything, B, large infrastructure changes, right? Mm-hmm. These are things that take not months, years. So what's a best practice that other ALN members can take who are on the federal side in planning long-term while being agile enough to take into account that things may change 2 years from now and with greater efficiency and effectiveness?
Yeah, I've got 2 big clients on the federal side that are active in the projects, and the best practice that we recommend and folks are putting in place is a program management office. I think, Mike, you discussed, breaking down the barriers, that the historic need for fleet and facilities to get along. They're always in services together. There's a common, leader there, but they don't really have to talk to one another in the current world. The fueling system is so efficient and there was no need to be tightly aligned day to day, but Now there is, like, you can't fuel without facilities being clearly aware, and facilities doesn't thank you when you buy an EV and then ask them for a charger after it's arrived. And so because it's a long time. Some of these transformers, they're hard to get, 6 months, 18 months. And the utility industry, as we consult on that side, they're facing a new world. They have a new business hookup model that is aimed at large construction companies and development builders. And those folks have all been taught over, nearly 100 years that it's just going to take this long to get the power to your site. And now you've got many more customers to the table who don't have 6 or 18 months in mind when they come to the utility. And everyone is surprised that the transformer is not even on the continent and won't be built and the copper's still in the ground. Like that's a big deal. And it's not a short solution, but there's a lot of opportunity there. And so you can see people entering the market, but the pace at which they enter the market is not clear. When it's going to actually be available is not clear. And for utilities who are have monopolies so that they can provide certainty, that's a frustrating place to be.
It's one more question, then I'll hand it over to Mike to ask a question here. Of course, you piqued my interest on supply chain management and how the supply chain has changed over the past, since the pandemic. We saw massive disruption. Can you give us an idea of what's happened over the past 12 months? Where are we going? Is it getting better? Is it becoming more challenging because of geopolitical changes writ large? So just love to hear your thoughts.
It is not my absolute area of expertise, but it is Guidehouse Insights just published an update on the vehicle availability, and there is this sense that 25 is going to be the year where vehicles are available, and the supply chain that's feeding that is moving in place. You can see there are bids out, RFPs for lithium mines in the United States. So it's there, but it's like the mining stage. And now we've got to get battery packs built, and the Ford plants in Tennessee there's massive investment, but it's young. So from a vehicle perspective, if we take that as being the end of the supply chain, there's a sense of vehicles. When we're coaching folks, we're saying the EVSE is not popping today because you can't get vehicles. But sometime between 25 and 27, they're going to be showing up, and it's going to be EVSE that's holding up the game. And now is the time, given that 18-month time frame.
Brilliant, thank you.
So I believe that's the market data EV geographic forecast North America.
Yes, just came out.
And I put it in the chat for our audience to be able to download. And actually, this is a real good kickoff to possibly an EV hour-long program, a web program that we'll talk about in more detail. But it seems like, in addition to this, web conversation, we need to promote that market data report and maybe get some federal agency clients of yours to come on and talk with us, because the issues that you're seeing, you're being leaders on the front edge of this very important issue. And we need to let people know that there's approach to this. And you were talking about having people at the table. The table's getting really big now.
Yes.
So okay, that's so everyone can look forward to a continuation of this discussion and less of a casual discussion here, and we'll bring some more to the table, so to speak. And one of the things that really stuck out to me when you said 5,000 vehicles need to be ready in the morning every day. And that's challenge when you're using just all gas. Now you're doing mixed vehicles, and that just becomes far more complex.
Yes, and it's the change management behind that, all of the little decisions that go into, because most most organizations are collections of habits that work for what they're trying to accomplish, and you're really challenging a whole bunch of stuff that didn't need to be talked about, that didn't need to be addressed in policy. We didn't have to manage your coffee in the morning, or where you got the donut, or what time you came in. It was just all out there. All of these processes just sat on top of this fueling infrastructure that was ubiquitous and cheap. And now that's no longer true. I haven't outsourced my fueling to the Exxon and Shell and the entire 8,000 gas stations that support them. I have to actively get involved in that. And how each employee interacts with that system is a little bit of a surprise. And getting them to change is an engagement issue. Even when you give a better product that's faster and more fun to drive.
I am so glad you brought that up, because as I was explaining to you, after 10 years, the Asset Leadership Network has come to the conclusion that it's not the tools, those work, the processes are proven, it's the culture, and leadership has to change that culture. And what you've been saying is ISO 55000 4.2 involve relevant stakeholders. And that's why a big table is needed. And we can't have vehicle drivers, having to show up at 3 a.m. in order to make sure they get the car that actually starts. Because if they just show up at 7, they're out of luck. And that's, especially important in law enforcement.
Absolutely.
So, can you give us a little bit of the highlights of that report that's in the chat?
Oh, no, I'm not prepared. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, that's what we'll come back to that for an hour-long program when we get offline here. We'll definitely have to schedule that. It seems as if the interest and the demand is just really high for that. So it's a really interesting circle on how we got here. The government, the GSA, published a report on electric vehicles. We put it into our newsletter. Moshe saw it and said, hey, we can talk about that. And now we're going to be having a web program where we'll be doing slides that take sections off of the report that Guidehouse created. And we'll be using some of your experience and the experience your clients are facing to try to help other agencies address the issues that you're already starting to help people address.
Yeah, and the big takeaway there. See, I read the newsletter, Mike Bordenaro.
Not only did you read it, it had gone into your spam, and you dug it out of spam to read it. And then you said, Michael Homan, and if I understand correctly, Michael, you're taking time out of your vacation to join us.
Nope, it's a work day. Happy to be here.
Okay, very good. I thought it was impinging on your free time. But boy, what a great introduction. So Moshe, thank you. This is what networking is all about, bringing in the leaders to be able to share best practices, because Mike, being in the military, you understand our use of rapid deployment of best practices. We need that throughout the federal government, throughout the country, throughout the world. And we appreciate you sharing what you have today, and look forward to the program that we can have in the future that dives into a little bit more detail on this subject.
It was my pleasure. Thanks.
Oh, so Chris Silkey from Portland's Parks and Recreation. I was going to get around to a question about that. So like a city that has, it's got police vehicles, but it's got park and recreation vehicles. And I guess it's through that, roundtable discussions of how to establish prioritization. So Parks and Rec, well, police is always going to be, a high priority, but when it comes time for disaster recovery and Parks and Rec has to get in there and clear trees, but you still need to keep the police going. So some type of asset management hierarchy, I suspect, is established. Is that part of what you do, help people do?
It is. It's all in the context. It begins in the context of site resiliency. So for utilities, it's storm. For federal agencies and armed forces, it's mission. But when you layer mission on top of site resiliency, which you end up coming at a couple different ways, because the load management, distributed energy resources, they all end up in this pot called resiliency. And it's an old idea. I mean, to have multiple fuels providing backup against different problems and having a layered approach to how we're going to get, how are we going to create the electron? There's you end up in resiliency. It's a very rich topic.
Well, yeah, and that's part of the things. Well, what we say is asset management has been around since before the pyramids. The concept of asset management isn't new. It's just our tools, human evolution of tools has been so complex that it forces discussions, like you said, that haven't been needed in the past. So thank you for putting a really clear perspective on asset management in the very specific area of electric vehicles, and kick-starting this whole new asset management subject for us. So you're going to be the team leader. Just volunteered you into sharing more information about what it seems you're very passionate about.
My pleasure.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Moshe, for bringing Michael to us. This has been really enjoyable, and we definitely want more. And I got to do this the right way by starting off that PowerPoint. We've been very happy with the transition to Guidehouse. Our good friends at Grant Thornton moved over to this new company, and it took just a little bit, not too long, for you to be able to bring that energy and actually recharged energy to the Asset Leadership Network now. So we thank you specifically. Homan, am I sharing? Yes, I am. I'm just going to do this. I'm not going to go to the whole screen. I got your name spelled right. I corrected that. And we'd like to thank our patron member and our organizational members, including our patron members, our organizational members, which we got to get on board with Guidehouse. I don't know how that is not in here, so I apologize for that. And thank Moshe for bringing Mike Homan to us. And then we're really excited next week. We've got so much going on. This is value and benefits from asset management that we do with the Australian Asset Management Council. And David Kraft, who is Director of Enterprise Asset Management at the MTA for New York, will be mainly talking about buses, and we'll be bringing up questions about electric vehicles to him. And Jim Kennedy, who's been in Australia for 45 years, the expert in asset management in many categories. He's got a book that he wants to present, but we're having him focus on rail. So that'll be really good. And then on next week's ALN Thursday at 3, we're having a very special first ALN AI brainstorm where we focus on ports. And we're going to be showing how artificial intelligence and digital twins governed with asset management can transform the industry, and I was doing that already. Don Arnott was part of a team that set up the new port at Rotterdam, and it is the first port to be ISO 55001 certified. And that's a very good starting point to be talking about electrification in the ports industry, where the energy from the cranes lifting and lowering the cargo containers actually generates energy that feeds into the microgrid. So they've got, talk about a lot of people at the table, they've got unmanned vehicles creating energy, using AI to understand where to put the cargo containers. It's really complex and wonderful. That's going to be an hour long, and I bet you it goes to 90 minutes for those who have the time. So that'll be very interesting. And then later this month, we've got back-to-back programs with the United Nations talking about how they're helping countries establish management culture. So that's a really big subject, which is why we're giving that 2 programs back to back, and really appreciate this. And there's a question about recording available. Yes, we do make these available. You can email me. I've got your email at Burns McDonald, and we'll get that to you. And again, thank you, Michael, and thank you, Moshe. This has been really fun. Look forward to more discussions on electric vehicles with you.